Social influence whole topic review. So the topic can be roughly divided into three broad areas: conformity, obedience, and resisting social influence. There are three types of conformity: compliance, identification, and internalization. Be careful not to confuse the types of conformity with explanations of conformity. Compliance is when a person changes their public behaviour but not their private beliefs. It is a very short-term change and is normally the result of normative social influence. It is at the lowest level. Identification is when a person changes their public behaviour and their private beliefs, but only when they are in the presence of the group that they identify with. So when the group disappears, they revert back to their original behaviour. So again, only a very short-term change. Internalisation is when a person changes their public behaviour and their private beliefs. So they take on those attitudes and values. It is usually a long-term change and is often the result of information or social influence. Explanations. Normative social influence is when people conform because they don't want to be rejected by the group and they want to be accepted by them. So that leads to compliance and identification. Informational social influence is when we don't know how to behave, so we look to others for guidance. We seek that information from them. It leads to internalisation. Asch's research. Here, you may see it referred to as outline and evaluate Asch's research, or you may see it referred to as majority influence. Remember, we need to be aware of what it can be referred to in the exam. So he wanted to see whether a majority could influence a single participant in an ambiguous task. So 123 male students from America took part in what they thought was a visual task. They had to compare a line, a reference line, with three other lines. Each participant took part in this task with 7 to 9 other Confederates. There was 18 trials, 12 of them were critical, where the Confederates gave the wrong answer. Participants conformed on 32% of the critical trials, 74% conformed at least one, and 26% of the participants never conformed. So we could say approximately a third of Asch's participants conformed. Therefore, he concluded that they conformed because of normative social influence, so a majority could influence a minority. Evaluation. Asch used a standardised procedure. The findings can be easily replicated, which increases the reliability. It was a lab experiment, so there are controls over extraneous variables, such as the lighting, the room, the experimenter. This increases the internal validity. However, Asch's research lacks population validity. Remember, in the exam, try to include our key terminology. So this is because the sample was biased. He only did it on male participants, so it is androcentric. Also, they were all American, so it's ethnocentric. And they were all college students. Therefore, we need to be cautious when generalising. It would be beta bias to apply it to females, as there may be differences between males and females in terms of their conformity. Also, it is culturally biased. Certain cultures may be more conformist than others. Another weakness with Asch's research is that it lacks mundane realism due to the artificial nature of the task. It might not reflect conformity to a majority in real life. There are ethical issues. The participants were deceived about the nature of the task, although it is necessary in order to reduce demand characteristics. Also, participants reported feeling stressed about disagreeing with the majority, so not protecting them from psychological harm. Now, in the exam, you don't need to include all 5 of these evaluation points in a 12 marker. However, If you are not good at writing or fully elaborating your points, then it is best to include 5. If you focus on 3, they need to be fully elaborated on, so following the point, evidence, explain, link. Remember, we can always use our counter arguments. So for example, if I start with a lab experiment and say that it is a good thing because we have that control over extraneous variables, increases the internal validity, I might then go and say, well, actually, the task lacked mundane realism, so although it has high internal validity, we may not be able to apply the findings to outside of the research setting. Conformity to social roles, or Zimbardo's research. So he wanted to see how people would conform to the social roles of either a prisoner or prison guard. So 24 male volunteers, college students, took part. They were the most healthy volunteers, and they were randomly assigned to the role of prisoner or prison guard. And the guards were given uniforms, dark reflective sunglasses, and handcuffs and truncheons. The results were the prisoners became very withdrawn and passive and submissive to the role of the prison guard. The prison guards became very aggressive, tyrannical. They made prisoners wash the toilets with their hands. Okay. The study had to be stopped after 6 days. It was meant to run for 2 weeks. So therefore, Zimbardo concluded that people do conform to the social roles. Okay. It was a controlled observation, so they were filmed and recorded. This increases the internal validity and the reliability of the results. Again, lacks population validity, only men, only Americans, cautious when generalising. There are ethical issues. Participants experienced extreme psychological distress. Some of them had breakdowns and had to be released early. Participants' behaviour may be the result of demand characteristics. In interviews, some said that they knew that he was investigating this and they were playing a role. Also, not all of the guards behaved in such a manner, so therefore it doesn't suggest that we do conform to social roles readily. So obedience. What are the explanations of obedience? We have agency theory and legitimate authority. So agency theory says that we are either in an agentic state or an autonomous state. Agentic state is when we feel that we are acting as an agent for someone else's wishes. Autonomous state is where we feel that we are responsible for our own behaviour. When we move from being in the autonomous state to the agentic state, it is referred to agentic shift. Legitimate authority. So a legitimate authority figure is someone who is perceived to be in a position of power or social control within a situation. The authority must be legitimate, so it occurs within some sort of hierarchy. So it could be institutional structure such as the military or within a school setting. So in Milgram's research, participants that were reminded that they were responsible for their own actions were less likely to obey. So that supports the idea of agency theory. Obedience was much higher within a prestigious setting such as Yale University rather than when it was in a rundown office, supporting the idea of legitimate authority. However, some people says that people resist the pressure to obey authority, and it's because of the situation or individual differences not meeting these criteria. Also, some people argued that rather than a genetic shift being the cause for the Holocaust, it was the experience of gradual acts of evil over a long period of time. Okay, so it's to do with the graduated commitment. Okay. Dispositional factors. This refers to the authoritarian personality. People with an authoritarian personality see the world as black and white. They adhere to the strict social rules, and they are rigid thinkers in their obedience to authority. It is the result of strict parenting, and generally parents who have authoritarian personality, they emphasise obedience and physically punish their children. Adorno argued that children who grow up in this family see this system as the norm and acquire the same authoritarian attitudes and learning through imitation, and makes them more likely to be obedient. Okay, it's measured on the F scale questionnaire. So remember, those people with an authoritarian personality are more likely to obey. So Elms and Milgram found that higher authoritarianism were more likely to obey. So those that scored highly on the F scale were more likely to obey in his research than those who didn't obey. Participants with a right-wing authoritarian scores were correlated with the maximum shocks given even when they told that they were not real. However, it may be the social context that is more important, so think back to the idea of proximity to the victim, the location, uniform, rather than personality. It can't explain Nazi Germany because it is unlikely that the whole of Germany had a personality trait. Also, there are methodological issues in the way that the questionnaire is designed. All of the items are worded in the same direction, so it means that people might just agreed with the item due to acquiescence bias rather than being authoritarian. Resistance to social influence, locus of control and social support. So when locus of control is the extent to which people believe they have control over their own lives. It ranges from internal to external. Those with an internal locus of control believe that their life is a result of their own behaviour. They control their behaviour and their actions. People with an external locus of control believe that it's down to external factors, so outside of their control, so such as luck and fate. Internals rely on less others' opinions, therefore they resist social influence. Externals are less likely to take personal responsibility for their actions and are more likely to conform or obey. Social support is when we have an ally. Okay, if we have someone that we can look to for support, we are less likely to conform and obey. So there's real world examples, for example, a protest within Germany. When there was disobedient peers, it gave them more confidence to resist an authority's order. Also, when we had a dissenting Confederate that wore thick glasses during a visual task, conformity was reduced, even though that support wasn't valid due to it being a visual task and we assumed that the person wearing thick glasses has poor vision. The fact that they didn't conform made us less likely to conform. Also, when Milgram's study was repeated and measured whether the participants were internal or external, less internals carried on. So 37% of the internals did not continue, compared to only 23% of externals, which suggests that locus of control does explain our obedience. However, locus of control in resisting social influence may have been exaggerated. It only seems to play a part in new situations. So it doesn't influence familiar situations. So if we've come across a situation when we've obeyed before, then we're more likely to do it again. Also, there's contradictory evidence. So Twenge found that in America, people have become more resistant to obedience. So they're less likely to obey. But also, they've become more external, which doesn't fit this idea that externals are more likely to obey. So it challenges the link between internal locus of control and resistant behaviour. Minority influence. Remember, we need to be aware of the idea that flexibility, commitment and consistency are important. So the aims of the minority influence was to see whether a minority could influence a majority. So 172 female participants were told they were taking part in a colour perception task. They were placed in groups of 6 and shown 36 slides. They were all varying shades of blue, but they had to say the colour of the slide out loud. 2 of the 6 participants were Confederates, and in one condition, the consistent condition, they said that all slides were green, even though they were blue. In the second condition, which was inconsistent, they said that 24 of the slides were green and 12 were blue. So it was found that on the consistent trials, 8.2 conformed, and in the inconsistent condition, they only conformed on 1.25% of the trials. So therefore, Moscovici concluded that the minority is more effective in a consistent setting. So the minority has to be consistent. So lab experiment, high control over external variables, increases internal validity. The use of control group suggests that conformity was down to the minority, not the slides being ambiguous or them being unsure of the colour of the slides. It lacks population validity, only done on females. It would be beta biased to apply it only to men. There may be biological or gender differences between the rates of conformity. It was an artificial task. It lacks mundane realism and ecological validity. So it's unlikely in an everyday setting that you would be judging the different colours of a slide. So therefore, does it really explain minority influence? And ethical issues. The participants were deceived about the nature of the task. However, it was important to deceive the participants as demand characteristics could influence the results. Social change. So remember the Asch that I've taught you. They need to draw attention to the issues. So minorities can bring about social change by drawing attention to it. So they could do protest marches. They need to create conflict to allow the majority to think about it at a deeper level. They need to be consistent both with each other and over time. The augmentation principle, if they show that they are willing to suffer for their views, that they are more likely to be taken seriously. The snowball effect, this is when it gradually stops being the minority and starts to become a majority. So more and more people start taking on this view. Social cryptamnesia, this is when people have the memory that social change has happened, but they don't remember the events that led to the change. So we've got real life example, the suffragettes. Refer to these to show that they met the criteria. Social change happens slowly if it actually happens at all. So minority influences are likely to be indirect and delayed. And also generally minority groups are considered deviant. So it's unlikely that the majority is going to agree with minorities because they don't want to be seen as deviant themselves.